everybody. Welcome to another episode of Sessions with Paula. Today I have with me Ray. He's gonna talk to us about roleplay. I met Ray through a group that was created by a mutual friend called the Sexy Educators of South Florida. And I was looking for someone to teach us a little about roleplay because I work with a lot of couples that fall into a routine and they have a really hard time getting out of their mind and into their body. So for me, something like roleplay not only checks the novelty box, but it also plays with that dominant submissive. There's a lot of trust that is involved. So I just think, and there's a lot of senses that are being used. It's a very sensual thing, and we're gonna learn a little bit about that today. So you guys, the first time that I saw roleplay or bondage, right, was in Exotica. Then I saw it in the World Erotic Art Museum, and then Hump. And you guys think Hump, it's a whole bunch of little films. And one of the films was about bondage. And when I noticed that it was two women and the whole bondage scene happened, and I was like, ooh, that's kind of sexy and kinky, and I want to learn more. So guys, let me introduce Ray. So Ray has been practicing roleplay for about 5 years. He has taken several courses led by Osada Ryu, who teaches the art of Japanese rope bondage, also known as Shibari and Kimbaku. Osada Ryu and Osada Steve, he considers their style of rope one of his favorites. Both Osada Ryu and Osada Steve have studied under Rosada Eikichi, who is widely regarded as the godfather of modern Japanese rope bondage and does live S&M performances in Japan. Wow, that must be amazing to see. So Ray, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Of course.
So Ray, can you tell us what inspired you to do this type of work?
So mainly the inspiration came from a certain Japanese painter. His name is Seiyu Ito. And Seiyu Ito is widely regarded as, one of the godfathers of modern Kimbaku. So essentially, he wasn't really tying people. It was his depictions of women in those bondage situations that really gave rise to the popularity of Japanese rope bondage. And so Seiyu Ito is also a very big inspiration for everybody over at Osada Ryu, Osada Steve, and Osada Eikichi as well. So, it really just finding him led me to Osada Ryu, and from there things pretty much just took off.
And tell me a little bit about when you think of yourself as a dominant, because you define yourself as a dominant.
I do, yes.
And you guys, for our viewers that maybe don't know what that means, can you tell us a little bit what that means?
So in a general sense, when someone says dominant, they're usually referring to a certain dynamic in a relationship, right? Where one person takes the role of the more dominant and the other one is far more submissive. And so for me, being a dominant, one thing that I always think of it as is all dominants are caretakers. It just, from the outside, the care that I'm providing looks like it's not care or like I don't care. But it's truly, to define a dominant, it's someone who is still disciplining, still domineering, still, strict with you, but at the same time, under all of that, they care deeply for you.
Wow. I guys can imagine, and I don't know, because something that really intrigued me, right, when I was watching this scene of bondage was how meticulous and even as you were sitting there, he tied this as he was just sitting there. He was just, we were setting this up, and all of a sudden I watch, and he tied this whole thing. So it is, I was watching you. It is very detailed. There's something about, and I think when we think about that emotional component, you guys, because I come from the mind, right? I really deal with the psychological part of all of this. But when we think about this, that is the psychological piece. There's caretaking involved, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. And do you always know that you enjoyed being a dominant? How did that role develop for you?
For me, well, a very common term is using saying dom space. So your space as a dominant. For the most part, there's a bit of a separation between the person who you are in a scene versus the person who you are outside of the scene. There's definitely, of course, it is mostly in private. So there's this certain element that you know being a dominant in the scene it's far more intense, and so I I find that rope really is a very key thing to my dom space. So my space as a dominant, my mental space as a dominant. So finding the rope and learning more about it and understanding part of what Osada Ryu really teaches is how the sensual art of rope and the connection that rope can bring emotionally, sensually, between two people.
Yeah, and I think, and guys, it is really important because already, Ray, you're talking about some myths that people may have because you're dominant in this scene. Oh my God, does that mean that you're like that everywhere else? So really listen to what Ray's saying because I think that's really insightful. Tell me a little bit. So I know, right, when you and I spoke, I know that your parents are Cuban, right? And I wonder, is there anything cultural or any familial messages that you kind of had to grow away from in order to accept, your sexual preferences or some of your likes?
So, I mean, well, for me personally, I'm aside from being a rope artist, I'm also polyamorous. So that's one thing that, growing up, my parents were monogamous. Of course, the one thing that was always pushed is monogamy. It's the way that things are societally, the way that things are supposed to be. And so,
like, ¿cuándo me vas a dar un hijo? When are you gonna get married?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of pressure on the nuclear family. It's so ingrained in Latin culture. The symbol of your mom being the matriarch and builder of the house. It's super big in Latin culture, and so breaking away from that was something that was definitely difficult as I grew. I became poly after learning about rope and about kink in general and stuff.
Wow,
like that.
Right. Amazing, guys. And this channel, I really aim to talk about the Latino culture because I think that's so key, right? Like, I think in order for you to be able to grow into yourself, you have to break up, grow away with some of the messages that we grew up.
Definitely.
And and that sometimes, unfortunately, we have to kind of pay the price that our family may not be accepting. But if you're happy and living and loving, and this is what makes you, breathe and feel awaken every day of your life, then this is what you have to.
Exactly. Yeah, I know my family doesn't ask questions about my sex life for that reason.
Have they stopped asking cuándo me vas a dar un hijo o un nieto?
Well, too late because I already gave them two.
Oh, perfect. Okay, there you go. So
I solved that problem real quick.
Yeah. Can you tell us, for people that are interested in introducing some type of role play, what are some basic things that you think we should keep in mind?
So the most important thing that people should keep in mind when they're doing role play is the fact that it is, in terms of BDSM and kink, it is considered edge play. So this is something like things like knife play, where there could be permanent damage that can be caused, either by, and it's all by improper technique. With rope, yes, it is painful. Yes, it is uncomfortable, but it never damages, even though it is painful or uncomfortable. So that's one thing that I definitely think people should keep in mind. Another thing that people should really consider is investing in good rope. Not just going out buying the first bundle of rope that you see on Amazon or something like that. Most of the time, you're not going to get rope that is is tested, that is dyed well, that has been treated properly, unless you buy it from a specialty rope maker, essentially.
Okay. Any local stores that maybe are Miamians that you know for anywhere where you think?
In terms of local stores, not really. Usually you do have to find this kind of stuff, especially natural fiber ropes, which is what we use for suspension.
Okay.
Or you can use nylon as well. But for the most part, finding these specialty kind of ropes, you're pretty much gonna either have to know somebody who deals with rope and this specific kind of rope, and or there are some artists down here that I can probably give you the names of later on.
Yeah,
sure.
and you guys, what I'll do is that when we post this, I'll make sure that I include some people in there just for those of you who are interested in buying the right rope.
Sure.
Because I think to start, it's really important to keep these things in mind.
The material of the rope is super important. Thickness of the rope is also extremely important. Length is less so important, but it's good to know what the standard is.
And Ray, thickness versus, tell me, is it a different type of feeling?
So, well, really, the general thickness for most ropes that we do shibari with, well, pretty much all ropes that we do shibari with, is 6 millimeters.
Okay.
That's the perfect sweet spot of being thin enough where your knots don't get too bulky, and thick enough where they're not biting into the skin.
Interesting.
You can use thinner rope if you were to do maybe just hand shibari through the fingers, or head shibari or face shibari. You might want to use a thinner rope. A thicker rope, I would never really see an application for a thicker rope actually being used on a body. As an upline in a pulley system for suspension, maybe thicker rope would be good. Has higher tensile strength, less likelihood of breaking. But for the most part, if it's applied to the body, 6 millimeters is the standard in the industry. Anything thicker, knots are uncomfortable. You can imagine if this rope was 2 millimeters thicker, a knot would be not twice as thick, but very thick. And then imagine a submissive laying on that knot.
Yes.
The smaller, the less bulky the knot can be, the better.
Okay. Oh, love. I'm already learning so many things. Okay. What can you walk us? You talk about a scene, right? Can you walk us a little bit through a scene negotiation? For
sure. So, in terms of scene negotiation as a dominant, there's a lot of things that you need to cover, but there's a lot of things that are specific to rope, such as one thing that I always like to ask is if there's any joint issues, if there's any stiffness in any joints, any mobility issues, any prior injuries to knees or elbows or stuff like that. Limbs that are going to be bent for a long time. Can you sustain that? Have you had an injury that makes it so that having your leg bent for more than like 10 minutes, it gets really uncomfortable, so things like that. As well as if there's any physical scarring over some of the areas where you might want to lay rope. They could be uncomfortable. Some people don't want rope in certain areas. One thing that I like to do is what's called toe torture. So I'll slip lines in between toes to add a little bit of stress to a maybe not so stressful tie. Some people want their feet completely avoided. Some people want crotch rope completely avoided. Others love it. So it's going over with your partner or whoever it is that you're going to be having that scene with, and understanding physical limitations first and foremost, and then secondly, physical preferences to sensation. Are they okay with abrasion? Are they okay with things being held still? Are they okay? Will they get claustrophobic? You want to eliminate the risk, the likelihood of you needing to use these.
Yes, what are those?
So these are EMT safety shears. So these have a little guard right here so that you can slip safely in between the skin and the rope should you need to cut it without cutting your rope bottom.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, guys. And I think, because sometimes, right, through social media, we see, I see these beautiful ties, right? And some people that have never really heard of this, they're like, oh my God, they make so many assumptions, because remember, you just see a snippet, but listen to everything that is accounted for and everything that's thought out. I would dare say that it's a very mindful type of experience.
Extremely. So one thing that as a rope top you always need to be mindful of is looking at your partner and seeing how their body reacts, right? So let's say I suspend my partner, right? If I look at her face and I notice the veins on the side of her head aren't bulging, no veins on her forehead are bulging, her breathing is pretty steady, I can tell she's not stressed, right? And if I wanted to add stress at that point, I could. And then as you notice your partner's body change, which is why it's very important to be close to your partner So you can notice the subtle movements that they make. If you lay a line across a part of their body and suddenly you feel them wince or twinge, it might be something that a submissive might not be thinking of at the time to tell you. And it's always your job as, the dominant or the rope top, whatever you want to call it, to be mindful of those subtle changes in their body. It's an extremely mindful form of bondage.
Yeah, that's right. And I love that you're saying this because I just did my sex therapy conference through ASEC, which is the Association of Sexuality Educators and Therapists. And there was a lot of sex educators this time around. And one of them was talking exactly about what you're talking about. She was talking about a scene. The submissive was saying, no, everything is fine. But her body was just telling a different story. So I think being connected in that way is so, so important. What else do you think? I mean, we've already covered some of them, but I wonder, any other misconceptions that you think that people have when it comes to roleplay?
That it's easy. That's one of the biggest ones. That it's easy. I seen a lot of people who you'll see the front of a tie and it's very nice, it's intricate, but it's simple, the front, but you don't know what's going on behind it. The amount of friction knots, the amount of cross tension, the amount of lockdown points that are back there. The real intricacy is not so much in what you see in front, it's what's behind. It's the actual knots, where the rope was going, how the rope was actually tied. That's the complicated part. And that's the part that people really don't see. They usually see either snips of a tie being done and then the finished product, or they just see the finished product. They don't see that rope bottom probably had to stand there for a solid 15, 20 minutes to have that very beautiful harness put on.
Wow, love it. I love how you just gave me a one-word answer and it's like so impactful. Is there anything emotional other than, because I think, that's so important, feeling taken care of, connected, your partner really being mindful. I'm a big believer that mindfulness always leads to better sexual and sensual connection. Any other emotional things that you think people are looking or experience when you're doing roleplay?
There's a big sense of being taken care of. There is also the sense of the loss of control.
Yes.
That's
maybe that's why I like it, because I'm like, I don't want to have control. I don't want to think. I want, just.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's the reason. That's the reason why so many people are into rope bondage, and it's because of that. Like, it is the relinquishment of any and all power. You can't move. You are immobile. You want to run away, you can't.
And the amount of trust, right? Because when I saw the little scene in Hump, is Dan Savage, does this every year, you guys. I always post it on my social media because I think it's awesome. And it's just different type of films. And the way that this woman tied up this other woman, it was like everything, and even her hair was like, and she could not move.
Yeah.
So imagine the trust that people need to have in order to be able to do this type of work.
Exactly. And you don't have to get into things like suspension to reach complete immobility. Just a hog tie translates very well to a human body. And that's 100% immobility.
Love it. So guys, I'm going to go get tied up now. No, I'm just kidding. We're going to learn a simple tie that all of you guys can use out there. So stay tuned because we're going to do that next. But before I let you go, Ray, where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram and I'm also on FetLife. So on Instagram, my handle is I was a bear once with 2 E's at the end of it.
I was a bear once with 2 E's at the end, and I'll put that as well.
And then my FetLife username is call_me_dad.
Okay, awesome. Ray, thank you so much. And you guys, stay there because we're gonna come back with a simple tie that you guys can, but remember, it's not that easy, but we're gonna see where we go. Thank you again for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Y bienvenidos.